so much for coming here. Thanks to 192 Books and Paula for hosting this event. Thanks to Maya Sullivan and Nick at New Directions for organizing everything. And thanks especially to Niela Orr and Alison Mills Newman for being here, sharing their time and words with us. Alison will also be reading and in conversation with Cynthia Hartman at NYU this Friday. She's flown in from her home in Atlanta, Georgia, to be here with us today. And I'm just going to say a few brief words of introduction. And I work in New Directions, and I edited this wonderful book. Niela Orr is a writer from Philadelphia, a story editor at New York Times Magazine, a contributing editor to the Paris Review, and an editor at large for The Believer. Her writing has appeared in the London Review of Books, The Baffler, the New York Times, and Harper's Bazaar. Previously, she was a story producer for Pop-Up Magazine and a deputy editor at The Believer. Alison Mills Newman started her career as the first African-American teenage actress on the television series Julia. I mean, this is such a special event for you. As a musician and a vocalist, and as a poet and songwriter, she has performed with Ornette Coleman, Don Cherry, weather reporter Taj Mahal. I just discovered she's also a painter. She's a filmmaker and the author of another novel, Maggie 3. Mills Newman is the president of Keep the Faith Film Ministries and a chaplain at Fulton County Jail. Her novel, Francisco, which we're here to celebrate, was first published in 1974. Ishmael Reed and Steve Cannon published it after Reed saw it on her kitchen table. In a recent profile of Mills Newman in the Washington Post, Reed recalled that he had never read anything like it. It's been out of print for decades, and New Directions is very fortunate to be able to reissue it for a new generation of readers. In the new afterword to the book, Mills Newman described her husband Francisco as wealthy with human faith and loving kindness. A recent New York Times review described Francisco as a dazzling book, written with the immediacy of life. The sentences brim with rebellion and pleasure, creating a sensual odyssey of self-discovery and experience. I could go on, but I don't want to leave this for this discussion. But one other thing I just wanted to bring your attention to is an extraordinary little documentary about Mills Newman and her early life that Marcia Goodman made. You can find on YouTube called Spirit Song. It's such a beautiful little film. And so please help me welcome Alison and Niela in celebration.
Yay! God is good. Yes, yes. So I'm just so happy to be here. I've said this before, but I just feel so honored that y'all would trust me with helping to celebrate this moment. I have been reading this book for weeks and been mesmerized by it, and just sort of, I find myself in a similar place to the protagonist of this book. Sort of lived an itinerant life and making lots of decisions right now in my life, and so I just am so grateful for this book. It was out of print obviously for decades, but it just feels like it was put into a time capsule, and it's been unearthed at the perfect time.
Perfect time.
Yes. In terms of the story of a young Black woman trying to find herself and to figure out what kind of artist she wants to be, and how she wants to be in service to the world, and in terms of the debates and some of the issues that are suffused in this book, the issue of revolution and how it's supposed to look, how it's supposed to feel, and the internecine kind of issues between Black men and women, and all of that feels contemporary. So it feels like either this book was very prescient, which I imagine it is. I feel prescient, like it was just ahead of its time, and anticipating all of these questions, or we just haven't done a good job of solving these problems over the 50 years that in between when it was first published and its republication date. So one thing Toni Morrison, who blurbed this book, has said that she finds hope in the past. Her hopes are in the past. She doesn't look to the future. She didn't look to the future to find solutions. She looked to the past. And I feel like I've found some answers by looking in the past. So I thank you for that.
Praise God.
Yes.
Thank you, Jesus. Well, thank you for all of that. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out. And to listen and share his experience with me. This is an amazing experience for me to be 72 years old and to have written a book. Imagine, I tell people, keep living and loving, because life is filled with wonderful surprises, like never give up, just keep going, because look, here I am with you all. Who would have known? But so, yes, I am Alison Mills Newman, and I wanted to be, I started writing before anything. I think it was my first introduction to me knowing that I was an artist, because I used to write poetry, and then my mother taught me how to play the piano, and then I learned how to transpose the words that I was writing to the piano. And so writing is a really beautiful way to first discover who you are, because you don't need a stage, you don't need anybody, you can just do it intimately. And then somewhere I saw Mia Farrow on television in Peyton Place, and some of you, it's too far beyond your time, but I realized looking at her, because when I would write poems, they were always romantic. And some of you, of us that are older, Mia Farrow had this image of romance, and so my little mind, 12 years old, I identified. And I said, oh, that's what I do when I'm in the bathroom making up love stories. I'm an actress, right? So I asked my parents if I could be an actress. And my father was against it, because he said actresses were whores. And my mother fought for me to do it, because she had been an actress in college. And she would tell my father at night, well, I'll protect her, I'll protect her, I'll protect her. And so with that, my father let me, and he later became my biggest fan. But my mother sent me to Frank Severa's workshop. At the time, I was sharing with Jeffrey that at that time, Maya Angelou was there. Imagine, I'm 12 years old. Maya Angelou is there. Beaver Richards is there. Don Mitchell, who later became a co-star in Ironside. All these actors starving. They're all starving. And I'm well taken care of, because I'm a kid, right? But how affirming they were to me, and how encouraging they were to me. And strengthening me in my art, which informed me and strengthened me when I became famous in Hollywood, and I was presented with a lot of troubling requirements. But it's an amazing time. It was an amazing time that I grew up in. And with that little introduction, I'm going to read a few little parts from my book. And again, thank you so much. Okay. I wanted to make it when I realized I couldn't fly. My jazz man don't know how to sing. He don't know nothing about no woodwinds, drums, no brass, no strings, but he's so fine. His music's in his eyes, and he plays what he sees with the funky saxophone sheen on the silver screen. I got up at 11 this morning after laying around, rolling around in the bed, hugging around in the bed with this friend of mine. I say friend because I ain't heard him qualify the relationship yet. Now, after fixing this man some breakfast who refuses to empty the trash, there are 3 bags overflowing full sitting by the icebox, lopsided. And 1 big, huge can of trash whose top will not close. And I guess he expects me to do it while he sits on that high stool in his bedroom editing his film. He's crazy. He doesn't make love when he works, and since I've known him, he's been working on this film of his. I mean, we did in all the first 3 or 4 nights of our relationship dangerously, because I don't take no birth control pills. I can't stand them things. And after he went away to New York, the whole week passed, and I wondered if I was. But then upon his return, my period was over, because mine only lasts a day, or if that. But he works hard, and I can feel it. When he gets into bed at night, he's dead almost before he closes his eyes and manages a few goodnight words. He pulls me to him and holds me softly, and I think we wake up that way. Let me see. Oh, I'll just add this. The film is called Ain't Nobody Slick, but I think Francisco thinks he is. It includes in its story Angela Davis, who Francisco interviewed while in jail. So Francisco is working on his film, and he's bringing a friend of mine, Chris Joy, to play a part. And so Chris Joy came to do the part, and we found her a really great dress, a bright 1930s slit out in the back boss red dress to wear in the film. And we found it in a little antique shop in North Beach just an hour or two before shooting time. Chris and I left the house early, and Francisco was filming a blood and violence police versus Panther raid in his bedroom. And I drove us down to the North Beach in Francisco's ladybug blue Volkswagen. We had salad and wine and talked about old times and new times coming at Rincos. And somehow we escaped these two black men. One was young, about 20, with wavy stockings, cap slicked down, baggy pants, meeting some half-tied tongue, hanging out, worn-out tennis shoes, grinning under his chest in a soiled white T-shirt, slightly high and ready. And the other man, at least 40, stinky, crazy, alley slime, smelling piss drunk, red eyes streaked and stuck on a wine wrinkled pup checked, black face. He must have worked with his hands all his life because they were something big and strong and viciously grinded in dirt. His toes were covered in raggedy tennis shoes, half tied too. And they followed us around in and out of shops, harassing me about how I probably had a white man waiting for me at home. And then later asking me if they could buy me something pretty and taking me home after accusing me of being a dyke. Okay. Let's see. Then I came in the kitchen and put these flowers in this vase amongst all this mess on the kitchen table and started thinking about how I first met Francisco over Ted's house. Ted's an artist, a great painter. Ted is one burly, big, beer-stomached, honest, sloven, beautifully greasy, silky-haired nigger Negro. And Ted took me over to his house from Jonathan's cottage where I was, staying all by his own self, which was just what I needed. There was a piano, candles, and I could play the piano late at night. There were lots of books on everything, African pictures of Egyptian monuments, figures, and fleas. It was a cabin house stuck behind this main house where this barefoot college couple lived with their mud-faced, giggling child. Tad took me over to his house to eat dinner and hang out and meet his wife. And then Tad started getting into a philosophical discussion about making it and how I couldn't change the world and how it was nice to have all these idealistic ideas, but they would just be ideas sung to you by Harry Crooner in the Sooner or Laters. And I'd come to know the stark, ugly truth of the world as is and always will be, period. And then, knock, knock on the door. And Tad said, opening it, here comes one black man who thinks he can change the world. He was tall and dark brown with a conquistador mustache, with some blue corduroy pants on and some kind of yellow and red striped sweater. And those shoes, he had on some blue shoes that had this yellow tongue sticking out of a red mouth with thick wooden heels. And I loved those shoes. I had a light for Francisco just behind those crazy shoes. He walked through the door with such vigor and perseverance and life, man. But he didn't pay me no mind. I was all in black again with my hair all wavy, pushed, parted in the middle, woolified, looking unheard of, and one of my eyes was bloodshot. Francisco was into talking about his film, this and that, and he wanted Tad to make some posters or something. And then they finished talking and settled down to eat. And I was still in the kitchen laughing with Jennifer, enjoying their two beautiful big-eyed sons, both under 12. And they were running around being delightful, smart, bad children when Francisco looked at me and me him. So I wanted to read. So I sat down in a chair, and Francisco asked me to be in his next film. Because in between all this action, somehow it slipped out about me being an actress in theater and TV on all those TV shows. and specials with my guest starring role self, and about some movie I was going to do if it ever got done. And Francisco said actors needed a challenge, and that was true. And so I talked about one TV show that I was on at 17, and I remember asking the producer if I could wear my own hair, because he had me wearing a long fall all down my back and hit midway in the center of my behind. Well, wasn't nobody white in America wearing their hair like that, much less black. And even if they were, if he wanted long hair, I had long hair at the time. And so I asked him one day on the set if I could please stop wearing that wig, because I was 17, playing a 17-year-old girl. And what was wrong with my own hair? That man looked me straight in the eye and said my hair looked like rats had been sucking on it. I should have known I was working for a man who was making a fortune off of a people he thought so little of. And how that day, when I was 19 and my car wouldn't start, and I called the Automobile Club of America to come fix it, and they sent this old black man in a rickety truck driving up the winding Hollywood hills, being passed by fast-storming MGs and long, slinky Ego Rolls Royces, till he got to my house hidden behind some thick shrubbery that I shared with Nancy, my best friend at the time, expiring actress. It was hot that day, and I fixed some lemonade at the suggestion of bow-legged, stringy-haired, good soul white girl Nancy. And I sat out in front of the driveway and talked to that old black man while he repaired my car. That old man was music. He had a cap on his head, polka-dotted in filth and grease. He'd tap his cap every now and then in a rhythmical beat. He had never seen me on TV, which was a nice feeling. He was so beautiful, a rich-skinned blues black man. You could tell he worked outdoors a lot in the sun because his face was so shiny leathered. His hand showed he must have worked hard all his life. The smile was like the root of a tree, so deep, so alive, so nurtured and light. I could see him sitting jolly at a bar, his cap before him on the table. I could see him sitting in a church funky Baptist pew, rocking to some gospel on-fire humble soul singers. I wanted to ask him desperately what gave him so much peace. What was that joy? But a suffocating shyness came out of nowhere and choked me, held me back. He got in his truck and drove down the driveway past the bushes and trees. I fought the inexplicable hindrance, broke free and ran down the hill in an expectant, hopeful rush to ask him the question on my heart. But in a poof, he was gone. I stood paralyzed, confused, wondering how he could have disappeared so suddenly as the earth shook and rattled beneath me. And I heard a commanding soft voice say, "The point is, there goes a real star." How could that old man be a star? Nobody knows his name. He's not famous, rich. He's no celebrity on the cover of magazines. I'm not a star. Shaking, I ran up the hills to the living room in my house and stared out over the hills, looking through the sliding glass windows, and saw Marilyn Monroe and Dorothy Dandridge dying. I shook my head, no. No, screaming no! I called my agent at CAA and said I was leaving for New York. "Are you in love?" he asked. "No," I wept. "If I stay in Hollywood, I'm going to die." I said hysterically, "I'm going to die!" He hung up the phone. I'll read one more part. So one evening, so I left Berkeley. I'll read this part. So Francisco let it be known that he wanted my phone number in LA because he would be coming down there. He gave me his phone number so I could call him the next day, because he couldn't call me because there wasn't no phone in Jonathan's cottage. So I left Berkeley and went home to LA. It was my first time in Berkeley, and I liked Jonathan and Tad City. It had been good to me. Jonathan had been good to me, my beautiful poet friend. I needed the rest. So one evening, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, Francisco calls me. I didn't believe it. I was surprised. And he sounded so great over the phone. He sounded like a kid. I couldn't see him at first, the first night he called or the second night. We finally got together one hot afternoon. He came to my father's house, and I was a nervous wreck. Before he got there, trying to figure out what to wear. Mostly everything was dirty, but I changed several times in and out of one thing into the other, and I kept on what I had on in the first place. And so, Francisco was wearing his long brown hairy legs and brown hair tinted golden and red spots by the sun, black Adonis in shorts, his feet in leather sandals, and another multicolored t-shirt on. I came downstairs and fumbled through some mail sitting on the bar, and Francisco leaned over gentle and kissed me on my cheek. I was gone. I was shocked that he was in my house, that he kept calling me, though I had said no twice. I was surprised that he even remembered me or bothered to call me. I mean, I was out. Where did he come from all of a sudden? So I left my dad's house after I introduced him to my dad, who reacted rather coldly. But our mood was not disturbed. We drove along the highway to the beach, engaged in our high, talking a mile a minute. So what really happened in Hollywood? Why did you leave and go to New York when you had it made? I shrugged my shoulders and gazed out the car window, listening to the sound of the thrashing, healing ocean waves. I sang ever so softly. I saw the ocean shining. I walked along its crystal light of goodness smiling. I didn't want to remember my encounters with old, fat, gray-haired, bald-headed producers at major motion studios, telling me of their pleasure of choosing me to star in their great script, written with me in mind, comparing me to Dorothy Dandridge and Marilyn Monroe, disappearing into their luxurious office bathroom only to return naked, lying on the floor and playing with themselves, inviting me to join them, making it unmistakably clear the repulsive act was required to secure the advancement of my already promising career. I'm an actress, not a prostitute, I youthfully protested. Scruples? You won't go far, the old, young, slimy producers, directors, and mocking montages laughed. I didn't want to remember telling my mother, who didn't believe me, confiding in older actress friends who encouraged me to do it and play the game. I wasn't strong enough to remember my deep buried graveyard, heartbroken confusion, wondering if I was the crazy one. Suicidal meditation stalking me in the valley of decision. It was too achingly painful to summon up the memory of being blackballed by Hollywood Babylon, traumatized and alone in my election to not conform. I'll stop for now.
Wow.
Thank you, Jesus. It's always hard, I just recently, it's only been like the last 5 years that I really even shared that, when you have trauma, you just keep it, hidden, and it's just different for me to share that, Yeah. Praise
Thank
God.
you. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for reading those passages. I mean, one of my favorite passages actually is the one about the car mechanic and the beautiful character sketch there, and the wonderful adjectives and just the beautiful prose, right, and the construction of that sketch. And we get to see that the protagonist is finding influences everywhere, right? And she takes seriously this working class man, whereas other members of her community sort of disdain them. Everything is about a game. Everything is about sort of extracting and sort of moving and maneuvering. But and we see that she is finding influence and inspiration in this gentleman, which I loved.
And that gentleman is actually an angel. Like, at the time, I didn't know he was an angel, But when I look back, I realized that was an angel because he just disappeared. And, his eyes were so shining and so bright. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, God in our lives, and I didn't believe in God when I wrote this book and this time in my life, but, God is always trying to help us and get our attention throughout our lives, even in times when we don't believe in him. Like, that's how miraculous and great and everlasting and unfathomable his love was, that even in the midst of my turmoil right there, he sent that man to help me, to show me that my validation, and that our human validation doesn't have to be in fame and fortune. Everybody, you got to be famous, you got to be rich, that your validation can just be in living life, loving life, living and being, a good person, and just being alive and learning as we go and growing as we go,
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a wonderful way of thinking of him as an angel. And as I was reading, I thought of him as a muse. We know that the protagonist is Francisco's muse, but that gentleman was a muse for her. And so we get to see the gestation of Francisco's film throughout the book. And I've been curious this whole time of the origin story of this book, So, like, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how this book came to be and what inspired you to write it.
How did this book come to be? So I left Hollywood, and I was a very, functioning, disciplined starlet. I left at a point when they were writing TV shows for me. So I grew up very functional as it applies to work or being productive, I guess. And I had been in New York, and I did a couple of plays, but when I came to be in relationship with Francisco, I think I returned back to my original first love of writing in order to, because that productivity, that discipline was so embedded in me that, I had to connect with my art and with myself some way. And writing is, as I said earlier, it's such a beautiful way. You can just do it, in the bathroom. You can do it in the car, you can just do it. So I think artists have many gifts, and, one of my gifts was music and, acting and writing, but writing is something that you don't need to be, and all you need is a pencil and a pen, And so unknowingly, I returned to that in the process of also, I think she was being productive also in the sense of being an assistant or helping someone else in their dream to fulfill their dream, because in many ways she had fulfilled her dream. She had been highly successful. I mean, 50 years ago, to be Black on TV, there are a lot of more Black people on TV, and you could, but you really stood out, and so I was pretty affirmed, especially after that encounter with the angel, and that, I was good. So I was in a place to be able to celebrate someone else. I had been celebrated for so many years. And, it gave me a great permission to celebrate someone else that I saw that had, gifts and talents. And so writing was a way that I could, I suppose, give myself away a little to the relationship, but also keep myself by writing. And I would write in the car. I would write when we drove along, those long rides from San Francisco to Los Angeles. I would write in the bathroom. I remember being awakened early in the morning to get up, out of bed and write. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I obeyed, that I submitted, that I listened. I didn't know I was writing a book. But I think Mika asked me, did I say your name right? Oh, thank goodness. I think Mika asked me, did I know I was writing a book? And I didn't know I was writing a book per se, but I felt a whisper that there was purpose in it. All I think I could grab hold to, or very slightly, very faintly, that there was purpose, there was a reason. Keep writing. Keep writing. So I didn't know it was a book, but I knew there was a reason. It turned out to be a book. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did answer my question. I'm curious to know how it ended up in front of Ishmael Reed. Like, how did he find it?
Well, Francisco was so we lived in Berkeley, and Berkeley was a hubbub at that time, as well as Los Angeles and New York, and that it was almost like another Renaissance season of actors and writers and musicians, like blossoming up and expressing their new ideas and sharing their art with the world. And so in Berkeley, there was Ento Saki Shenge, there was David Henderson, there was Ishmael Reed, there was William Demby, there was many other writers. And Francisco was not a writer, but he was a filmmaker, and he wanted to direct one of Ishmael's books. And so he was in conversation with Ishmael, and I think Ishmael came over one day to talk to him about Francisco directing his book. And I had been writing in the kitchen, I remember, and I got distracted, or he came over, and I just left the papers there. I left my writing on the table. Really mindlessly. And the next thing I come back, and I don't know where I went, and Ishmael's read it, and he says, I'm going to publish this. I'm going to publish this. And he went on with some other things, amazing things that he was saying, and I mean, I'm 20 years old, like, what do I know? So I'm like, well, okay, publish it. Like, really? But it was really amazing because I don't even know that I even read it. I just wrote it, and I don't even know that I reread it or cleaned up anything or changed anything. I think that at some point I handed it to him, and the rest is history, as they say, But I think it's just a process of living life and being led and being unknowingly where you're supposed to be. And sometimes it feels strange, like you're not supposed to be there, but you are. If you're there, you're supposed to be there. And so it's just that process of living life. And I heard someone talk about without expectations. I don't think I ever did anything in life for money. I was too young. Back in the day, you didn't really know about it that much. Like nowadays, I think children, teenagers, or people my age know more about money and fame and fortune and the pursuit of it. But I think years ago, that wasn't so much the pursuit. It was more the love of what you felt in your heart and your soul, and you just kind of trusted and went along with it without any real expectations. You just living, and so I think it was just the art, unknowingly, the art of living, of actually living, freely, and unknowingly with faith, And I was sharing with someone, because a lot of times they talk about it being original, the book being original. And I think I wasn't trying to be original. And I think if you trying to be original, like, you'll miss, just be you, just live, and in that, unknowingly, you can give birth to something original. But if you plot it and plan it, it won't be, because but if you're just living, breathing, that's in itself, every day is an original day, right? And so if you stay in that spirit, and thankfully this person was in that place where she'd thrown everything away. She'd thrown people said her career away, but people didn't realize she was also gaining a new life, And she was gaining. She gained. She lost nothing. This person in this book lost absolutely positively nothing by walking away from fame and fortune. Absolutely nothing. This person gained so much from having that little bit of understanding who she was
Mhm.
at 19. I think it's really amazing when I look back, I am not a prostitute. I'm an artist.
Mm.
And I think that was affirmed by the people that I grew up around, Maya Angelou and Dick Anthony Williams and B.A. Richards. We were in this little hubbub, and our vision, our dream was to do great art and to make the world a better place through art. That was our purpose, to make the world a better place for all humans, to use our art for that. And that was deep in me. And that was my purpose in being an actress that they gave me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was presented with selling my soul to just be famous or escalated into, I was already, but more fame and fortune, that conflicted with what they taught me in the workshops,
Mm-hmm. Did it feel like, because one of the major themes of this book is like the character sort of negotiating her relationship to power and people in power. Did it feel like sort of taking some of that power back by writing the book?
Well, now it does. Who knew,
Mm-hmm. Because you're able to craft the narrative and control the narrative and decide what you put in, decide what you leave out,
I think very much so. And
Mm-hmm.
singing was that for me too. I turned to my music a lot because I had control over it.
Mm-hmm.
And the musicians also, the musicians that I was blessed to be in the presence of, artists have a whole different mentality versus the producers and directors in that corporate business in Hollywood. They respect your art, they respect your gift, and they seem to always know that it's spiritual, that it comes from some other. They may not particularly believe in, Yahweh or Jesus, but they believe that there's some spirit, and they have that understanding and they respect that, and so me being sent or guided to be in the environment of artists, they respected, the art in me, and also affirmed me and respected me in that way, and there was no manipulation. And so yes, I got to be in control in both situations, the writing and the music. I got to be in control of what I sang about, what I was writing about, and it was intimate, between me and the unknown possibilities and purpose that I knew not of, But I encourage people, in your art and in your purpose, just do it. We may not know where it's all going to lead, but it will lead somewhere wonderfully. And even if it's just so much that you have it and you're 80 years old and you can go find it and read and say, just for yourself, that's beautiful.
Yes.
So
you mentioned Berkeley as sort of like this artistic hotspot and the influence that the city has on the book. You talked about driving from Bay Area down to LA and sort of how that ride kind of has influenced sort of the book. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about place in the book and place and the role of California as like a character, almost a character in this book, and like how you went about characterizing these cities and sort of I'm interested in that.
Well, in my characterization of cities, and I think people or things in general, I think that I'm very detailed, specific. For instance, you can look at a flower and just from a distance, like you just see the red or the the blue or the yellow. But when you really start looking at a flower, you start seeing like little dots and little lines and all these little intricacies in it. When you really look into it in detail, and somehow I have to give glory to God. It's just the idea of it was just in me to zoom in beyond the superficial, to zoom in like that other level, that the mystery, the things unseen, the things that aren't obvious, and kind of bring them out. And so as it relates to place, Berkeley, I don't know, did I describe Berkeley in the book? But the environment that I was in, the Berkeley, with the writers, it was a very supportive environment in terms of, the writers. You'd walk along the street and you'd see a bunch of writers, some famous, some unfamous, but just all sitting there drinking wine and talking and laughing and, taking a break from their writing. And it was just natural, just like you walk along the street, you see people. It's just a natural environment of artists being artists and not even aware that, they know they're artists, but not being conscious of it, where I'm an artist. It is what you are, And so it's just sort of natural. You just walk along and, there's Ishmael Reed. And I remember going somewhere after I wrote the book, and there was James Baldwin and Josephine Baker. And they're just all sitting there like, in the world. And I knew this as an actress, and having been famous, people look upon them and idolize them. But then you know that they're just people, like we're just people. But all of those people were in Berkeley. I met James Baldwin in Berkeley. I met Josephine Baker in Berkeley. I didn't meet Toni Morrison in Berkeley. I met her in New York. But I met a lot of the great writers, and they're just walking along like bus drivers or, school teachers. They're just walking along like you and I, so, yeah.
You've mentioned some of these luminaries and some of these famous people and intellectuals that you encountered, and some of those folks make their way into the book. So we see so many people mention Angela Davis, Muhammad Ali, James Brown is a through line throughout the book.
James Brown. My husband actually met James Brown in real life.
Wow. So I was reading and I was just wondering that, you're drawing from people in your milieu, and Francisco is a work of, what they would call autofiction today, sort of autobiographical fiction.
Okay.
And I think every work of fiction draws from life, and is autobiographical in some sense. Like every character done right is a version of the writer. But I'm just wondering about the challenges and the opportunities that you saw in grafting so much from life and incorporating so much of that into the action of the book.
Well, I think artists, we draw from life. And sometimes when we're dry or we think we're dry, we sometimes, have to take a break from art. They're focusing on art to go live. So you can draw from living. And we document it in our mind, and we may not use it right then and there. We might use it 10 years later or a few years later, but an artist gets their craft from actually living, or at least observing, watching and putting it in your brain. So an artist, we can look like we're not doing anything, sitting by the beach or sitting on a tree or just walking along, but we're like always pretty much documenting what we're seeing, what we're feeling, and we might use it years later or use it that very moment. But you have to live to be an artist. You have to experience heartache. We often always hear about, this song was born out of my heartache, or this book was born out of my my father passing, we draw from what we live.
Mm-hmm.
And I encourage you, if you're a writer, draw from what you live. Write it down. Write it down. Catch those moments. Be submissive to the call to record and to document. Because who knows? You might end up with a book.
Yeah. Do we have how much time? Do we have a few more questions, but I wanted to.
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay. All right. So I have quite a few more questions, but I kind of wanted to just to ask about to ask about Francisco, because the protagonist is Francisco's muse. She happily embraces that role, but he ends up being her muse in the writing of this book. And so I know.
What do you mean by muse? What does muse mean? What do you mean?
I think of a muse as sort of as a source of inspiration.
Okay.
And so as a helper, as an aid, as a creative aid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe that the protagonist sort of talks about like how she's sort of taken on this role and enjoys the work that she does to help him bring about this film.
And I think also I want to add, she doesn't know that she's doing it. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
the doing of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so just because this gentleman is so beautifully rendered in the book, I kind of just wanted to leave space and ask about him and who he was. And yeah.
He's the father of Joseph Newman sitting over here. And Joseph is one of the fruits of this gift of love that God gave me, even when I didn't believe in him and us. Francisco was a genius. And as you could see, he was very, I don't know if you've read the book, but he was very focused on his art at the season and time when I met him. And fortunately for me, even though I was frustrated, I understood, because I was an artist and on television, and I understand the focus that it takes to get anything done. And there's a section in the book where he talks about having a woman in his life was a luxury, and it's been a lot of fun to see how different people respond to that. But what he actually meant was that he was doing something brand new and different that he'd never done before, and it was a luxury to include me, to embrace me, to embrace me as an equal, riding along, in this journey of him making his movie. Because I was sharing with somebody, I remember when I had the lead role in a play by Thornton Wilder. I forgot the name of it. Our Town. And I remember I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't have. To have a boyfriend would have been the last thing in the world, because I was really focused on the role, and it was very demanding. And so I understood the demand that he felt upon him, and I wasn't in competition. I didn't want to distract him. I didn't need my ego satisfied or complimented, because if there was such a thing, my ego was, very firm from having, grown up in the environment and the affirmation that I had been given. I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for him. Not in a prideful way, but in a humble way, because it helped me make good decisions about who I was. It helped me know who I was as a human being in my identity. But I understood the fight that it takes to get your dream done. And I was in it for the fight. I was there to be his buddy and to fight with him, and to believe with him and to believe in him,
Yeah. I mean, this is such a wonderful document of a beautiful struggle in many ways, a revolution, but of the struggle to make art. And so I'm just so grateful.
And good art, that was our goal, to make good art to bless the world. And I'm just so grateful and surprised that the response to this book has been that it's good art.
Yes.
that people are getting blessed by.
Yes.
And I'm so humbled and amazed. Isn't that amazing? I'm amazed. And I want to thank New Directions. I want to thank Jeffrey for searching to find this book. He said he couldn't find it. And he found it. And not only did he find me, and I want to thank Maya and Mika and everyone at New Directions. I'm so grateful for this moment. It's so exciting. And thank you, Paula. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. And I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. And I'm just so humbled and thankful. Thank you.
Your book's here too.
Do we have time
Yes.
for people to ask questions?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like one or two questions?
One or two questions? Okay, yeah, sure. If anyone has a question, Alison,
Any
I think
questions?
we'll have to sign folks too, right?
Mhm.
So,
I'd love to ask questions, answer any questions. So feel comfortable.
or come up to her later.
Mhm.
And you'll sign some books, right?
Yes, that would be so lovely.
And we should announce the thing at NYU because
Oh, yeah.
that's gonna be so crowded.
When is the
That's on Friday.
Friday.
Yeah, yeah, so,
This Friday,
yep, at the writer's house, City of Hartford, we run the forward.
Right.
It's-
that should be great.
What time is it on Friday?
It's actually at 3, I believe, because that's where the writings,
Thank you so much.
hold on a second.
Thank you more. Thank you for those questions.
Of course.
We're friends, right?
Yes.
You gonna take my phone
They're
number and we
Oh,
can
of
talk?
course.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Sorry, 5.
Okay.
No believe us. 5.
So I just want
The
to,
line starts at 3. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
First, I'm going to use that piece I want to write. Get into the craft. And
Oh, yes.
all of that stuff.
It's my son's
Thank you for coming.